Folks, Canadian Prepper here. We have some major deployments of strategic weapon systems, not in Ukraine, but along the borders between pro-Russian countries and NATO countries. All eyes are on the looming counteroffensive, and in fact, Kiev is under bombardment as we speak. But there is a much more serious situation developing between Poland and Belarus, as well as the Baltic states and Russia. We're going to talk all about that today, and that is just scratching the surface. I also need to share with you some information I have from an inside source from someone who was flying supply shipments to Kiev before the invasion started. Now they've been reassigned to flying weapon shipments to Taiwan, and they have some stories to tell. So we're going to talk about that today as well. This, of course, comes in light of a Taiwan minister saying that they are requesting to come under the nuclear umbrella of the United States. If you think that the Chinese were dead set on Taiwan before that announcement, it's pretty much locked in right now, and they've likely expedited their plans threefold after hearing that Taiwan wants to come under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. Now, wants to and will be able to are two different things, but we're going to parse that all out for you today. Now, before I do that, I should pay tribute to those who've lost their lives fighting for the cause of justice and liberty, freedom all around the world, not just in the United States who are celebrating Memorial today, but just anywhere. Anybody who's sacrificed themselves for the greater good, even those who've been exploited unjustly by the military-industrial complexes of the world, I salute you, and I hope your sacrifice is not going to be in vain. You sacrificed yourself so we can argue about which bathroom we're going to go in, but I do believe on a long enough timeline, your efforts will be vindicated, and it's not going to be in vain. That we will get past this great filter, even if World War III comes and the nuclear bombs fall. On the opposite end of this, I do think that we will have salvation in more respects than one. So thank you for your service. Now, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we are going to talk about, and I'll just put up some sludge content for you in the meantime here. All right, let's, of course, I logged out, and now I have to log back in. For those of you who have short attention spans. Okay, what you're seeing behind me here is S-400 missile defense systems being trucked in, trained in, to Belarus. Now, what's so significant about this? This is Russia's most capable weapons defense system. They do have the S-500 and the S-550 that are more capable, but I don't believe that those are in mass production quite yet. The S-400 is the top of the hop, arguably, at least on paper, even better than the Patriot missile defense system. They are sending 3 of these systems, I do believe, not to the northern Ukrainian border. This is the thing. They're sending these to the border of Poland, near Kaliningrad and near Vilnius. Now, why this is so important is because if you've been paying attention to my reports, you would know that there is a lot of suspicious things going on. In fact, let me do the synopsis of what we're going to talk about. Then I'm going to show you the map, why all of these deployments of strategic weapons, both on the NATO side and the Russian side, are so concerning in light of the fact that every day, it seems, the open source intelligence guys are screaming about the irregular amounts of doomsday planes that are in the air. Now, we have Lukashenko emerging from the dead and claiming, and the reason why I say that, if you've been paying attention, there's Ukrainians are saying that Lukashenko is on his deathbed in a hospital somewhere, even though he's coming in front of the camera being interviewed pretty much every other day. Now he came out and said that any nation that comes under the CSTO Russian alliance umbrella is going to get nuclear weapons just like they did. The reason why this delivery of S-400 is so significant and timely is because I think before they actually roll in the nukes, they're going to want these in place to make sure that those tactical nuclear weapons are defendable. We have the Czechoslovakian general saying that a war between NATO and Russia is quite possible. Russia has shut down the border Poland has shut down the border for entry to Belarusian and Russian trucks. So that's telltale sign that diplomatic relations between Russia and Poland and Belarus are dwindling. We have Russia suspending participation in the conventional arms treaty with Europe. This is something that hasn't been honored anyways, but now it's just official. We have some governors in Russia. I'm not sure if that's what you would call them in Russia, if there's a different name for them. But the governor of Belgorod had suggested that maybe we're going to have to annex Kharkov. And it appears as though that indeed, if the Russians do want to fully secure their newly acquired annexed territories, that they would. And in addition to that, protect against long-range Ukrainian missile strikes and just their whole strategic assortment of forces in that region, that they're going to have to complete the ring and completely separate Kiev from having any access to the Russian border whatsoever. We have Taiwan getting the deliveries of numerous types of weapons, and that's only going to continue to the tune of 19 billion. We have China declining the invitation of a military delegation. The American, I believe there's some sort of conference going on, and the Americans wanted to open a line of communication with the Chinese, and the Chinese basically just rebuffed the whole idea and said, look, we're not really interested, considering there's rumors that you are going to try to, or even the conversation, the discourse about Taiwan coming under the American nuclear umbrella is going to make China very distrusting of the Americans, and we're likely only going to see the acrimony ratchet up between those two in the not so distant future. We have Serbio-Kosovo tensions brewing. Many NATO soldiers were injured today by Serbian protesters, as illegitimate or legitimate as their grievances may be. It's likely that that is going to provoke and escalate the situation further. The Serbian military is en route to the crime scene. We have Lindsey Graham, who successfully made it onto the Russian shit list. Okay, this guy is openly calling for the assassination of Vladimir Putin and cheering about the deaths of Russian soldiers. It was only a matter of time. We also have a much more hawkish tone in Russian media. It appears as though all the things that you would see in terms of the consciousness of the Russian people and the Russian media, what you would see happen before the shift from a special military operation to full-blown war and possible mobilization is in fact occurring as we speak. The only reason why the counteroffensive may be delayed, in spite of the fact that Zelensky came out today and said, yes, indeed, we have a date. They actually have a date and they have a plan, but of course they're not going to tell us what the date and the plan is. Apparently there's some flooding in the Odessa region, and that this, of course, is going to complicate. If there's a lot of rain, that's going to make things muddy. That means that the brakes are going to be put on this counteroffensive business until the ground is firmed up enough that tanks can drive over it. Gonzalo Lira completely thrown under the bus by the U.S. State Department when questioned by a reporter. A representative of the U.S. government basically was completely ignorant to the concerns about Lira being arrested by the Ukrainian authorities. If you don't know who that is, I'll let you know in just a minute. Doomsday planes abound in the air again, claim the open source intelligence guys. We have Ukraine calling for 500-kilometer range missiles in order to hit Moscow. They're asking the Germans for those. We have Patriots in Kiev confirmed to have been taken out by some satellite imagery that we've received, or at least partly confirmed to be taken out. And the Taliban are the good guys, again, apparently, because they're fighting with the Iranians. So don't be surprised if we start to, reframe the Taliban, in spite of all the things that we claim to hate about them and all the reasons why we're there in the first place. Now they are, history is just repeating. The same thing with the Mujahideen and all that. It's just replaying. Now it's the Taliban. We have Russia pulling thousands of tanks from storage. And this one take with a grain of salt, but there appears to be a lot of tanks moving in the direction of the eastern border. So not with the border in Ukraine. These are not headed south. A lot of these are headed to the Baltics. Not to the Baltics, but that general vicinity. We have pontoon bridges, convoys of portable pontoon bridge vehicles in Bulgaria. Some people speculate that these may be en route to Ukraine, possibly just speculation. Of course, they would need pontoon bridges to cross the Dnieper River, which they would need, of course, for the counteroffensive, but I don't think it would be made that obvious if that's in fact was their plan. And Canadian wildfires continue to rage. Okay, now, first things first, let's just look at the map here. Let's put this all in perspective, okay? So these three markers here are roughly, really ballpark, where they're going to be putting the S-400 missile defense systems. You can see it better illustrated on this map here, the actual locations. More or less, that's where they're going to be, okay? They're going to be, and they're all in the direction of NATO. They're not along the northern border with Ukraine. This is already heavily mined, fortified, hedgehogs, dragon's teeth, the whole 9 yards. And on this border between Belarus and Poland now, what's been happening is not only have they limited border crossings to, I think, one border crossing for trucks to come across, now they said that Polish and Russian trucks cannot come across. This comes after there was all the stuff with the Polish authorities confiscating the various monies and belongings of Russian diplomats in Poland. So we're starting to see the potential complete breakdown of diplomatic relations between Belarus, Russia, and Poland, okay? We also, and just look at the way things are being positioned here. We have Patriot missile defense coming to Vilnius ahead of the NATO summit. So these are NATO and Russia's best missile defense systems, both being put on the border after the official suspension of not only the New START treaty, but also the conventional arms treaty in Europe, which limited the amount of conventional weapons that could be deployed in certain places at any given time to a certain number to minimize the risk of escalation. That has all been thrown out the window. These borders are about to be loaded with various types of weapon systems. In and around the Kaliningrad region, in the Baltic Sea, we are constantly seeing reconnaissance, surveillance, and intercepted warplanes in this direction. We're seeing a lot of NATO warships in the Baltic, especially concentrating at Polish ports right now. We have the HIMARS system on the border with Kaliningrad. So you can see that it's almost like the pieces are being put into position. And here's an actual satellite image of one of the S-400’s already in Belarus. We can see that they're preparing the ground for, depending on which way this counteroffensive goes, if it even goes. The Ukrainians are incredibly confident, but of course we can't believe anything that anybody says at this point. The fog of war is just so thick right now, it's really difficult to say. There is no definitive one way or the other. As much as I know about this, and as much as I know how the Ukrainians exaggerate about their capabilities, I'm still kind of on the fence with respect to how this counteroffensive can go. Because if the Ukrainians concentrate all of their forces and do some sort of blitzkrieg maneuver, the Russians don't know where this maneuver is going to come from. So they have to spread out their defensive forces. And if the Ukrainians can outflank and catch them off guard, I'm presuming that's how they're wanting to make up some ground. Okay, so it could go either way. I'm not a Russia bro. I'm not a Ukraine bro. I'm trying to look at this objectively because I care about not dying in a nuclear war. All right, so that's essentially the situation that we have here. We just have this buildup of military equipment, not in Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, there's shitload along the Ukrainian front, but along here, and in particular, I haven't gone into detail about what's been going on here, but there's been all sorts of stuff. F-22s, the Russians have been deploying S-400 on their end, and it goes all the way up to Finland. In fact, way up here, if we go up to Norway today, the Russians were doing live fire artillery exercises right on the border. Okay, right there, Norway could actually see the artillery. Okay, so yeah, It's not looking good, guys. It really is not looking good. Russia is on the brink of, I think, mobilizing. There are people calling for it. Prigozhin is saying that we need to go, like for a few years, we need to just retreat into full-blown war mobilization mode. I know he's just a private contractor, doesn't have a lot of say in the Russian government. And of course, the Russian government has to walk a fine line. But all they need is a sufficient enough Reichstag moment. If it wasn't enough what happened in Belgorod, where you have the people there now saying, we want to take up arms, give us weapons so that we can, fight off the NIZI threat. I was going to say Nazi threat, okay, because that's what they are. They're self-professed, self-proclaimed Nazis, although they're Russians, so they claim. Anyways, regardless, the historical, there's so much overlap and convolution that goes on between these two borders, between Russia and Ukraine. Who's Russian, who's Ukrainian? I don't even know all the history, but I know that it's not cut and dry like a lot of people think. But they're calling for extra work days, people to work longer hours. They've been in that mobilization for a long time where they're manufacturing a lot more weapon systems. Both sides are they've reached the point where they're calling for the assassination of other sides' leaders. Okay, so you have Medvedev, who's basically saying that the Kiev regime must cease to exist. Russian propagandists are now saying that. TV state media pundits are openly calling for erasing the Kiev government, taking out even, and this is very important, Lindsey Graham. Okay, now for them to speak so openly about threatening not only to arrest Lindsey Graham, but to actually taking him out, which is what the state media has been claiming, that's a big, big development. That's a major escalation, guys.